Scribbly Gum presents The Seaside Witch, Episode 4. My second day in Rosewood Bay, I awoke feeling better. Perhaps it was the restful night of sleep, or the industrial quantity of artisanal cheese I had snacked on the night before in bed. Maybe it was the fact that the sun was shining and the sky was full of white, fluffy clouds. But something felt different, more settled. I eased out of bed as Penelope opened one green eye from her perch on the windowsill where she was sunning herself. "I'll have sardines today," said the voice in my mind. I had momentarily forgotten I was sharing a home with a talking cat. But rather than get upset, I just nodded and headed to the kitchen, where I also freshened the water bowl. As strange as it was to be around a telepathic cat, it was nice to know that she was actually happy with her breakfast. And really, it wasn't that much different from a pet begging for their food. "I never beg, witch. I demand," the strange voice said, as Penelope slunk into the kitchen. "And if you'd like to keep all this skin on your body, you'd better not refer to me as a pet again." Okay, that part was annoying. The whole reading my thoughts thing. And why on earth did she keep referring to me as a witch? Maybe, at a stretch, my great-aunt Valerie was some sort of wise woman. But me? I didn't have a magical bone in my body. And just because a local coven wanted me to become a member didn't mean I was going to start brewing potions or dancing naked under the full moon, which is what I was assuming all witches did. After raiding my goodie basket for breakfast, I decided it was high time I flipped the sign on the front door of the shop. It was, after all, part of the agreement with Great-Aunt Valerie, along with looking after Penelope. My great-aunt had been very decent about the whole thing, charging me no rent while I stayed. She'd left me a budget for cat food, paid the council rates in advance, and had told me that any of the profits from the store were mine to keep. While I didn't imagine I'd sell a whole lot of things in a town as small as Rosewood Bay, even a small amount of sales would allow me to cover my living expenses, namely food and fuel for my car. If I was incredibly lucky and could move some of the bigger items, I might even be able to set aside some money so that when I was ready to move on and live my wildest dreams, I'd have a nice little nest egg to make that happen. Even though I wasn't quite sure what those dreams were at this point. Whatever it was, though, would make me loads of money with very minimal effort. And all of those dreams had absolutely nothing to do with flying a broomstick or reading people's energy auras or whatever the coven of witches did in their spare time. So I brushed the snarls out of my hair and ascended the creaky flight of stairs down to the store, with a teacup in one hand and a plate of buttered cookies in the other, because it's never too early in the day for morning tea. Glancing towards the door, I was surprised to find there were several people waiting there. One woman had her nose pressed against the glass and smiled eagerly when she spied me. Happily, none of them had managed to get through the locked front door, even if it had presented no barrier to Penelope returning in the early hours of the morning. Setting the teacup and biscuits carefully on the counter, which to my eternal disappointment hadn't magically sprouted another wicker basket of all of my favourite things, I hurried to the front door and turned the lock. A middle-aged woman with amber eyes nearly knocked me over in her eagerness to be first in the shop. I carefully tapped the doorstop into place, and then for my own self-preservation, I retreated behind the counter where I could safely observe the customers. They poured into the store and disappeared down the various dusty aisles. The amber-eyed woman seemed to know exactly what she was looking for. She beelined to a rather sturdy-looking chestnut cabinet, rummaged around in the third drawer and triumphantly pulled something out. Then she marched up to the counter, object in hand. I stood up from the comfortable chair, as it seemed necessary to deal with this very forthright customer. "You're not Valerie," she said, "but I suppose you'll have to do. What is this, and how much is it? I can't find the price tag." I stared at her for a long moment. Surely the person buying an object should know what it was, particularly someone who had managed to find it exactly where they seemed to be looking for it. She pushed the item into my hands, and I nearly knocked over my cup of tea. It was about the size of a bunch of bananas. It was purple, with a shiny red handle. It was I had absolutely no idea what it was. I turned it over carefully in my hands and looked for a price tag, but there was none. Just as I was about to tell this amber-eyed woman I had no idea what the thing was or how much it cost, Penelope landed on the counter. The amber-eyed woman took a step back and looked at the cat warily. "Check the ledger," Penelope said into my head. "It's the green book in the drawer." Carefully setting the object down and smiling apologetically at the woman, I pulled open the drawer and took out a leather-bound green ledger. "Please give me a moment while I check the price in my book," I said, hoping, praying and wishing that I might somehow be able to find the item in there. But what the hell was I supposed to look up? I had no idea what the item was, other than a weird purple thing with a shiny red handle. I flicked through the book for a moment, then on a whim, thumbed my way to the W section. Running my finger down the page, I almost snorted when I found it. Weird purple thing with a shiny red handle, more commonly known as a cog-rhythm machine, used as a massage device for pregnant women in Lebanon in 1890s. Price, $75. I looked up from the book to find the amber-eyed woman staring at me expectantly. "Ah, just as I suspected, this is, of course, a Lebanese cog-rhythm machine," I said, trying to muster the gravitas of an auctioneer at Sotheby's. "It was used as a massage device for pregnant women in the 1890s, and it's a downright steal at $75. The woman nodded gravely, and then in less time than it took to draw another breath, she had slapped 2 crisp $50 notes down on the counter, making Penelope hiss. "I'll take it. My daughter-in-law is going to announce her pregnancy tomorrow, so this will be the perfect gift." I carefully bagged the so-called cog-rhythm in one of the second-hand supermarket bags that were stashed behind the counter, handed the woman her change, and watched as she bustled out of the store, clearly pleased with her new purchase. Given everything I'd experienced over the past few days, it was really no wonder I'd never heard of a cog-rhythm before. I turned my gaze back to the green leather ledger. It sat there, on the counter, innocent as you like, emitting not a scrap of anything occult. Next, I sold a book of Persian love poetry to a young man with a lisp. I found that in the ledger, under foreign book with maybe poetry. An older gentleman with a bristly moustache bought a painting of a gum tree on fire. A young couple, who looked very much in love, smiled as I bagged up an old ring set with an opal for them. When they had left, I noticed the back of someone's head in the far corner of the shop. Whoever it was appeared to be browsing, so I took a sip of now tepid tea, and my eyes slid back to the green-bound ledger on the counter. Every item that had been brought to me by a customer had been in the green ledger, regardless of the vagueness of my description. Either my great-aunt had coincidentally described a whole range of objects using an identical string of adjectives, or the book had somehow guessed exactly what I was looking for. Every single time. It had provided the item's real name, a brief description, and the price. The evidence suggested it was probably some sort of magical ledger, but I preferred the much more far-fetched notion of a string of coincidences. It wasn't even midday yet, and I'd already sold a handful of products, far more than I'd ever dreamed of selling in a little town like Rosewood Bay. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad after all, I thought, as I sighed with contentment and bit into one of the butter cookies. With a little bit of luck, I'd make even more sales in the afternoon, and I'd have no more encounters with any witches or frowning, grey-eyed young men, and before I knew it, I'd have enough money to go and start living my life somewhere else. My mouth was full of cookie, and my mind was full of dreams, when the customer I'd only partially spied in the back of the store suddenly appeared at the counter. I looked up, only to meet hard, slate-grey eyes. I almost choked on my biscuit. It was almost as if I'd thought of him and he'd directly appeared. Then I pulled myself together, frowning a little at the young man from last night. "You," he said, as if the very word were an insult. "I see you made it back to town then. You're lucky not to have had any misadventures snooping around on private property like that." The way he said misadventures sounded distinctly like a threat. I still had my mouth full of biscuit, so I took a huge gulp of tea and almost choked when it stuck in my throat. I was sure my face was red, both with discomfort and indignation. But thankfully, my journalist training kicked in, specifically page 3 on how to deal with rude and unlikable characters, and I forced myself to smile and hold out my buttery fingers. He might get under my skin, but there was absolutely no way I'd ever give him the satisfaction of knowing it. "Hi," I said brightly. "I'm Astrid. Thanks so much for the directions. I'd probably still be wandering around your property if you hadn't steered me back to town." His deepening frown was his only response. I smiled right back, even as I quavered a bit on the inside. Finally, he dropped his gaze and pushed a wicked-looking machine towards me across the counter. "There's no price. How much is this?" I almost flinched away. It was a savage metal contraption with jagged teeth arranged in an interlocking semicircle, like a mechanical jaw that had snapped shut. Rust flaked onto the counter, and I could have sworn there was some smell attached to it I couldn't quite place, but made my stomach curdle. I avoided touching the thing, instead reaching for the green ledger and thumbing through to the M section. Metal jaw torture device, also known as a bear trap or demon snarer, used throughout Europe, Asia and North America to kill or capture bears and other large predators. Price $250. I drew in a breath before meeting those slate-grey eyes. What the hell did he want with a bear trap? The bear trap's $250. You must be a collector then. It's not like we have bears here in Australia." "No," he said, a cruel smile appearing on his lips, "but we do have trespassers and this works just as well on them." He reached into the back pocket of his trousers, pulled out a worn leather wallet, riffled through it and slapped the exact change in cash on the table. Then he picked up his weapon and without so much as a backwards glance stalked out of the store. The bell jingled merrily as the door clicked shut behind him. I stood for a moment, oscillating between annoyance and disquiet before jumping out of my skin when the 6 clocks behind the counter all started chiming in unison. It was 10 a.m. 7 hours until I could close the doors, retreat back upstairs and get lost in one of those galloping romances I'd discovered on the hallway shelves this morning. Glancing around the shop to make sure it was empty and seeing there was no one on the street, I headed back up the stairs to make more tea. Even rude, angry-eyed customers were better tolerated with a cup of tea. I left Penelope sleeping in a basket by the counter. Surely no one would try pilfering anything in the presence of a talking cat. And even if they did, she'd be able to tell me exactly who it was. I didn't plan to be long. Just a quick trip to the toilet, a quick rummage in the goodie basket, and a refill of the teapot. The kettle had only just boiled when I heard the faint jingle of the bell. I hurriedly poured the water over some fragrant fruity mix, grabbed a packet of ginger nut biscuits and trotted back downstairs. It was Annabel, of course. Her cheery face beamed up at me, her cheeks like 2 red apples, and her periwinkle eyes twinkled as she smiled. "Good morning, Astrid. You seem in better spirits. I'm glad to see you've got the shop open." Careful with my freshly boiled water, I descended the last step to the shop. "Annabel, what brings you into town?" I glanced behind the woman, half expecting to see the rest of the coven trailing in behind, uninvited and unwelcome. But Annabel was alone, save for a large timber crate she had perched on the counter. "I thought you might need some veggies and some eggs," the older woman said, gesturing at the box. "Valerie's got quite an excellent herb garden out the back, but it's not really enough room to grow veggies, so I usually drop off whatever I can spare." "Oh, that's very generous of you. How much do I owe you?" "How about a favour?" she said, her eyes twinkling again, and I couldn't for the life of me guess if she was joking. "Oh, and we're slaughtering a pig next week, if you're keen on bacon and pork chops. The coven always gets first dibs." Annabel was smiling. Was she joking? I really couldn't tell, so I just murmured another thank you. She nodded at me, then turned to go. For a moment, I was relieved. Then I remembered a set of slate-grey eyes, that cruel bear trap, and the whole set of circumstances that was just odd. Calling Annabel back to the counter, I quickly recounted my run-ins with the young man, both on the property where he had emerged from the bushes, and also in the shop, with the terrifying trap he had come in to purchase. Carefully conjuring an image of his face into my mind, I described him in detail, right down to the shirt he was wearing this morning. The smile left Annabel's face as she listened carefully. When I had finished speaking, she put a hand on my arm. "That'll be Cheryl and Roger's boy, Matty. They're odd folk, living up at Sapphire Heads. If you want my advice, it's best not to go up there unless you're invited." Matty. I committed the name to memory as another dozen questions popped into my mind. Who is he, though? What does he do? Annabel was silent for a long moment, as if weighing what to tell me. "Matty is a sniper in the army. He's done several tours, often to the most dangerous places you can imagine." I nodded, waiting for her to continue, but her eyes were shuttered. "I don't like to gossip, but he's not the same lad he was when he left. Please just leave him be." Annabel looked troubled as she turned to go, so I held the rest of my questions for another time. "Enjoy the veg," I murmured my thanks again as I watched Annabel leave. "Penelope!" I thought loudly as soon as I thought I was alone. "I'm sleeping," came a snarly reply. What was Annabel not saying? "I'm not your personal secretary, witch. If Annabel doesn't want you to know, there's probably a very good reason. Now stop stuffing your face with butter cookies and hand me one of the treats in that jar." I was almost tempted to ignore the rude demand. Almost. But then Penelope leisurely extended each one of her needle-sharp claws casually as if she was simply stretching out a slight cramp in her paw. She didn't need to rake them down anything for me to understand the implied threat. I handed her over 3 treats, just to be safe, and escaped with my hands intact. Then I hauled the huge box of veggies up the stairs, and admired all the homegrown wonders Annabelle had brought. Fresh stalks of asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower, beetroot, zucchini, pumpkin. I'd be eating like a queen all week. As I stowed the last potato in the dark box at the bottom of the larder, those slate-grey eyes popped back into my mind again, and I wondered who else I might be able to ask about the mysterious Matty.